And we don't know who was out there, but I'm basically saying we shouldn't leap to conclusions and believe the first thing the corporate media tells us about the North Korean situation. Again, North Korea doesn't want a restart of the Korean War. South Korea,
listen, Mike, I hear you. And I mean, it is starting to point towards false flag over in the Pacific. They're south of China on the Korean Peninsula. And you're right. I mean, Israel admits to the Lavon affair. The NSA declassified 2 years ago, Chicago Tribune, that all the admirals, and I literally had them all on, they're almost all dead now, what they said was the truth about what happened with the USS Liberty. So that's confirmed. It's just, how would Israel stand to gain starting a potential war, even nuclear, in the Pacific? Drawing the U.S. away so that they could then have their own war with Iran? Or what's the, I guess that's what the big banking establishment wants, is they do want a big global war. So through that crisis, they can establish their world government. We know Israel's part and parcel of that. So is the U.S. and the EU. It's just that even from my research, it's hard to believe they're all working in concert that closely. But I guess that's where the evidence points. But clearly there's elements of our own Navy SEALs. I mean, we know it came out in the New Yorker magazine and on MSNBC that Cy Hirsch reported that Cheney wanted to have U.S. troops attack U.S. ships to blame it on Iran 3.5 years ago. So, I mean, my only issue is there are other suspects that do stage some terror. I mean, is there any evidence Israel was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin?
Well, absolutely not. The Gulf of Tonkin began with an inexperienced sonar operator hearing his own ship's propellers, and Johnson knew that it was an erroneous report when he went to Congress with it. But getting back to the Korean situation, first of all, even though we're suggesting that Israel might have been involved there, I'm not saying that they were acting unilaterally or alone. We know that the U.S. and Israeli intelligence services team up together on some of these various operations. Now, if North Korea and South Korea restart their war, and that starts dragging resources in from China and Russia, that is going to take some of the potential for support on Iran's side away when the Iran war cranks up. Remember, the biggest fear right now is that if Israel launches a war with Iran and the U.S. gets dragged into it, that Russia and China will at least logistically be supporting Iran. But if they're tied up in a new war over in the Korean Peninsula, that is less support they're going to be able to send to Iran. And it's always been that logistical support that has been what is preventing war with Iran. That's why they're trying to keep Afghanistan torn up. That's why they're trying to get Georgia into a whole new war to close those tunnels through the Caucasus Mountains, is to prevent the resupply of Iran from Russia.
Well, you make some really good points, and time will tell. But regardless, we know that the power structure has stated that they want more than just a regional war, bigger than Iraq, as a global distraction to bring in this global banking dictatorship. And so I find it very suspect that all of this, all these different kickoffs for more regional tension and nuclear war is just suddenly sprouting up and popping up everywhere. And you're right. If Russia and China are drawn off with a situation on the Korean Peninsula, that makes it a lot easier for Israel, who is openly saying, I mean, for those that just tuned in, the last month Netanyahu has said 3 or 4 times, we may go ahead and nuke Iran at any time. They're trying to pass sanctions to blockade all trade into Iran, which is an act of war, according to the Geneva Convention, and Ron Paul's on record with that. So there's no doubt that things are just going to get a lot more hairy. What are you worried about next, Mike? What shoe are you looking for to drop next?
Well, as you point out, we have got way too many of the world leaders and world financial leaders and world political leaders who see their own personal fortunes being improved by a new major war. I think back about this wonderful movie called The International, and the storyline is basically that this large international bank is caught engaging in weapons trafficking, covert weapons trafficking, and the investigator says to the bank, why do you care if thus and such a country wins their war? And the bank says, oh, we don't care if they win it. It's just war creates debt on both sides. So we're going to start wars because it's good for our banking business, and we don't care which side wins or loses because both sides go into debt. And if you look back at our own history in the United States, the U.S. government got out of the crash of 1907 by getting us into World War I. They got out of the crash of 1929 by getting us into World War II. Here we are in the throes of the crash of 2007, and look how hard our government is trying to start wars with anybody at all. It almost doesn't even matter. I'm almost reminded of Michael Moore's wonderful film Canadian Bacon, where America declares war on Canada just because they need a war and they can't find anybody else to fight with.
Well, that's another great point you've made, and we now have open discussions of attacks on Iran, which is just completely illegal. And going back to last week, Mike, Iran says we'll give our uranium to foreign countries like Brazil or France or Turkey, you pick, and that way it'll be enriched to a level that can't be used in weapons. And then the stance gets even more anti-Iran. I mean, Iran, at many levels, really has tried détente.
Have you heard about the Lulu letter?
Yes, but tell folks about it.
Okay, well, basically, in a nutshell, this is a letter that was leaked out and exposed the fact that the United States knew that Turkey and Brazil were negotiating with Iran over a uranium swap, but that the United States gave its approval for the negotiations in the expectation that it would fail, and then they would have one more thing to use to say we need to go to war with Iran because, look, Brazil and Turkey tried to talk to Iran, and Iran wouldn't listen, and Iran surprised them by saying, yeah, this is a deal we can live with. And so now the U.S. is in a panic. They're trying to find some way to derail this situation. Hillary's out there screaming about sanctions. It's too little, it's too late, because it's not about the sanctions. It's not about the uranium. It's not about nuclear weapons. It is about selling the American people yet another war on Israel's enemies in the Mideast. We've got suckered into Iraq. We're being suckered into Iran. They're trying to go into Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen. Everywhere. Have we invaded enough countries yet to qualify as a world war?
Well, have you seen well, yes, I mean, if these conflicts stay ignited, it will be a world war by every definition. It's going to be in more than 2 regions simultaneously. But going back, have you seen the new video out today? It's up on prisonplanet.com of Oliver Stone interviewing the former Argentine president, who said he met with Bush, and Bush said we must have more wars. Everyone must be taught to kneel before us. This is great for our economy. But yeah, great for the bankers' economy. They're all making record bonuses while we go bankrupt.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, if you look at the reality of how much of our gross national product is put into building things that kill people, and you'll realize that the United States is not a nation of peace. It is a nation of war. Murder and mass murder and killing is the business of the United States, and it has been all the more so over the last 30 years, where our manufacturing of the items of peace has basically been given away to other countries. And the only thing the United States seems to manufacture anymore is trouble and death on a large scale.
Well, people need to understand that the globalists at the top are apolitical. It's all about power. It's about playing groups off against each other. And the world population has such an elementary understanding of this that it makes them just fair game, like legless chickens being eaten by foxes. But Zbigniew Brzezinski said 2 weeks ago that for the first time the world has awoken to the true power structure. We're not distracted by presidents and prime ministers anymore that come and go. We're now looking at the real power structure, and he said the elite are in trouble. Did you see that video?
Yes, I did, and I also read about the comment that Brzezinski did. He's absolutely right.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mike, your audio's cutting out there a bit. Let's come back and get your take on that on the other side. And then we're going to keep you for one more segment after that so we can talk to Ted, Eddie, Joseph, Keith, Jimmy, and others. And we'll continue with your calls into the next hour with a bunch of other important news as we continue to cover the tragic events in the Mediterranean with the boarding of these aid vessels.